Hi, this is Anthony Germaid, and this is week 4, ELRC 7503. And the topic I'm going to research and discuss today is on experiential learning. As we go through this video today, we'll discuss the key areas of experiential learning, which will include the history, the key principles and components, the pros and cons, and then some real world examples of experiential learning. First, what is experiential learning? Experiential learning is defined as a philosophy and methodology which educators purposefully engage with students in direct experience and focused reflection in order to increase knowledge, develop skills, and clarify values. Experiential learning emphasizes learning through action, learning by doing, learning through experience, and learning through discovery and exploration. The history of experiential learning began in the early to mid 1900s when educational psychologists such as John Dewey, Carl Rogers, and David Kolb laid the groundwork of learning theories that focused on learning through experience or learning by doing. It was Dewey who brought the concept of experiential education into mainstream education when he discussed specifically problem solving and critical thinking in experiential learning rather than memorization and rote learning. Some of the key principles and components of experiential learning include number one, the student or the learner is the key and the focus, and learning should always occur. Students should also learn from each other in a semi structured approach, and instruction should be connected to real world issues. The instructor should also act as a facilitator more than a teacher. All of these principles are why I selected experiential learning for this video because they apply directly to adult learners in training situations. Lecturing does occur in training situations in corporate or nonprofit presentations. However, it's far more productive when the adult learners are engaged and the instructor acts more as a facilitator, and the learners can all learn from each other. The instructor can also learn from the learners. So it goes in both directions. But these four components or principles are very important. Other key principles and components of experiential learning include the focus of experiential learning is placed on the process of learning and not the product of learning. Stages of reflection and application set experiential learning apart from older common themes such as learning by doing. Experiential learning occurs when experiences include reflection, critical analysis, and synthesis. And then experiences require that the learner take the initiative, make decisions and choices, and become accountable for their own results. Other key principles and components of experiential learning include that the learner is actively engaged in asking questions, investigating, experimenting, being curious, solving problems, assuming responsibility, being creative in constructive meaning. And specifically, I think assuming responsibility is the most important one when it comes to adult learning for training. The learner must be responsible for being an active listener and all of these other things that you see here. The students also must be engaged intellectually, emotionally, socially, and physically. This involvement implies that the learning task is authentic. And by socially, it means that students and learners need to be willing to interact and do team building exercises and learn from each other. Obviously, physically means they must show up to the trainings and be intellectually and cognitively involved. And then finally, results of the learning are very personal and act as the basis for future experience and learning. All learners, adult learners in training programs are expected to bring samples of their past experiences on the topic, whether it be leadership, interpersonal communications, or emotional intelligence, and able to contribute from their own academic and professional experience to others in the training session. Other key principles and components of experiential learning include that there should be opportunities existing for learners and instructors to explore and examine their own values during the trainings. Instructors' roles should be to set up experiences, offer problems to solve, set boundaries, support the students, avoid negativity, and facilitate the learning process. By avoiding negativity, what that means is that it's not unusual for learners in training sessions to start becoming negative and turn the training into a gripe session or waste too much time with negative thoughts when their goal is to be providing solutions to the other students in the class and allowing the instructor to facilitate the learning process. And then finally, the instructor must recognize and encourage opportunities for learning. That means that there might be a topic that's not on the agenda that comes up from a learner, and the instructor should be able to recognize that. And if he or she sees value in that, have the learning group to discuss that in more detail, even if it's not planned ahead of time. When it comes to the pros and cons of experiential learning, as you can see, there's a lot of pros to it. They would be consisting of things like learning by doing and actually experiencing an issue, or an example might be a team building exercise for adult learners in a training, sharing and reflecting on what happened, what were the key points of an activity, processing and analyzing what's important, generalizing. So what that would imply, okay, we learned this lesson from this particular training. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to apply it to our jobs or our profession? And then the application of now what? And then also, learners are more motivated when they have a personal stake in the topic rather than being given an assignment or just a lecture. And then relationships are developed and nurtured. And that is the transition of or transfer of knowledge from learner to self, learner to others, and learner to community and society. When it comes to the cons or negatives about experiential learning, there are the fact that the instructor and student may experience success or failure. They're not sure of the outcome of the training until it's applied in the workplace or whatever the situation is where the adult learner may be taking this information to. Then there is risk taking and uncertainty because the outcomes and experience of the training cannot be totally predicted until, again, after the training is done. And then if the learner is not self-motivated, they are very much unlikely to learn. It's very important for adult learners, especially in professional training situations, that they be self-motivated to learn, not just at the information at the training, but to review it, reflect on it, go over it. And then next, the learner may not apply the transfer of knowledge that they learned to their job, or they may not know how to. And then if the instructor does not facilitate well, then the learners will be less engaged with the program. And then finally, as a real world example of experiential learning, I'll use one that I actually did in one of my mental health trainings, where I produced a video about a reenactment of an opioid overdose involving college students as the actors. So this involved David Cole's whole learning cycle, which is action, reflection, conceptualization, and application. And we used college students as the actors, and every student had to role play where they were the quote victim of an opioid overdose, and then other students had to role play where they were delivering Narcan successfully to the quote victim, and they each changed roles. And we found that to be a very experiential type of training. And we had to assess and interview each of the student actors afterwards to see what were the pros and cons, kind of like a verbal interview assessment afterwards. And then finally, with experiential learning, it's a formative ongoing assessment where both observations and checks for understanding is essential for effective experiential learning. And we found from producing this video that was an excellent real world example of experiential learning where college age students, young adult learners could experience the effects of a potential opioid overdose and how to successfully provide a solution. Thank you for listening.